Welcome to ASEAN Peoples Speak, Season 2. I'm Regine Jessica Buell, your host for this podcast. Last season, we talked about some current and trending topics in the ASEAN region. This time, we will highlight how human rights progressed and developed in the region by embarking on a new theme, History of Human Rights Building in ASEAN. Are you guys excited? I for sure am! This second season, we are going to have guests from both government and civil society organizations who will share their learnings and experiences as they push for the institutionalization of human rights in ASEAN. This is also an opportunity to reflect on and commemorate the significant events of human rights development in the region. To start off our first episode, we will be joined by a well-known human rights and women's rights advocate in the international community. She will be giving us a perspective coming from civil society organizations. She is a Malaysian human rights advocate and has been involved in the promotion of women's rights. She has been an advocate for equality and non-discrimination for the past 35 years. Her work has focused on building capacity for the domestic application of international human rights norms and standards through law and development policy at the national and international level. In 1993, she founded the International Women's Rights Action Watch Asia Pacific, an international independent NGO based in Malaysia that globally monitors and facilitates the implementation of the United Nations Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, or CEDAW. She was elected as a member of the UN Committee on CEDAW from 2005 to 2008. In 2010, she was appointed by the UN Human Rights Council to the panel of inquiry to investigate the raid by Israel of the flotilla carrying humanitarian goods to Gaza. She has also served as a CEDAW expert assisting UN agencies such as the OHCHR and UN Women, and has provided technical services to several Asia-Pacific region and selected countries in Africa. Currently, she is an executive committee member of Women's Aid Organization in Malaysia and of the National Council of Women's Organizations, which is also based in Malaysia. She holds a master's degree in English literature from the University of Madras in India and a master's in gender and development from the University of Sussex from the United Kingdom. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure to welcome and introduce to you our first guest for the second season, Ms. Maria Shanti Dairiam. Hello, Shanti. Good evening.
Hi. Good evening. Good evening.
How are you?
Thank you. I'm very well, and thank you very much for having me on this program.
Well, thank you very much also for joining us in the second season of ASEAN Peoples Speak. How are you and how's Malaysia?
Hot right now.
Oh, well, in the Philippines where I am, the rainy season actually started already. So in the morning, it's a bit hot, but in the evening, we do have the occasional
Cool.
rains.
Yeah.
Yes.
Same here. We have very similar weather.
All right. So we are very excited to have you today. And as I've mentioned a while ago, for the second season, we are going to focus on the theme, History of Human Rights Building in ASEAN. To start off, let me ask you, as a human rights advocate and women's rights advocate based here in the ASEAN region, we all know what ASEAN is today, but we would like to know, how was ASEAN in the beginning? What urged the countries to come together and eventually create and sustain this kind of organization?
Thank you for that question. ASEAN actually was founded in 1967, August 1967. That's quite a long time ago. But what's interesting is it was founded in the midst of regional conflict. The countries of ASEAN were not friendly towards each other. Indonesia was literally at war with Malaysia in the 1960s because they were not eager to have Malaysia being formed when Brunei and Sabah Sarawak joined the Peninsular Malaysia. They wanted to prevent that. So there was a confrontation with Indonesia over this, and there was an Indochina war, which had where countries like Vietnam, Cambodia, etc., were fighting for their independence from France, and that was called the Indochina War. Was going on, and in Malaysia there was a communist insurgency as well. So there was quite a bit of conflict going on, and these countries, especially the first countries, the founding fathers of Asia, of ASEAN, were Philippines, Indonesia, Thailand, Malaysia. These were the more well-established countries of Southeast Asia, stronger. They had, at least barring the Philippines and Indonesia, Malaysia, Singapore had been colonized by the British and had achieved a certain level of political development, the political systems and government and so on. And Philippines was well developed too at that time. And in the midst of this conflict, and there was cultural revolution in China and support for communist movements in Southeast Asia by China. And so there was fear of communism coming together, affecting the Southeast Asian countries. So these four countries that I mentioned were non-communist countries, and they were not sure whether the United States will come to their assistance if communism took over, and they decided to form ASEAN. And the objective was definitely to nurture a stable environment for nation building and for economic development through regional cooperation, so that they can have cooperation among themselves in the midst of all of this conflict. But subsequently, Brunei joined the ASEAN in 1984, and then Myanmar, Laos, Cambodia, Vietnam joined in the 1990s, almost 30 years after the founding.
Almost 30 years, yes.
Yes. In Myanmar was 1997, Cambodia was 1999, and so on. Vietnam was 1995. Almost 30 years later, they joined. But the interesting thing about this is that these countries, Myanmar, Laos, Cambodia, Vietnam, were very, very different countries compared to Philippines, Indonesia, Thailand, who are much more developed politically as well as economically. But it was decided that the whole of Southeast Asia, 10 countries coming together, would give some level of stability and a potential for economic regional cooperation. But the main concern was peace and security within Southeast Asia because of all the conflict that was being witnessed. And I want to mention that in 1971, there was what was called a Zopfan Declaration, which is a zone of peace, freedom, and neutrality. So that these countries of Southeast Asia didn't get drawn into any other conflict that may come around. And that they will remain neutral, and that they will be peaceful.
So this agreement that you were talking about is something for all the countries to respect and to abide by, so that these countries will not meddle or be neutral when it comes to certain conflicts.
But this declaration, it was called the Zopfan, Zone of Peace, Freedom and Neutrality, was in 1971, before Laos, Cambodia, Vietnam joined.
Joined. Oh, I see.
So it was already
I see.
there.
Mm-hmm.
So these countries who came in later, 30 years later, had to abide by this neutrality uh,
Yes.
declaration. So
Mm-hmm.
it was really peace, stability, and security which brought ASEAN together, because they felt that that was critical for economic growth within ASEAN.
I see.
So,
So that's a very nice thing that you pointed out. That the ASEAN, the states that created the ASEAN really focused on peace, freedom, and security among the states that joined, which is quite interesting because it was only after 30 years that other nations or other states joined, and
yes,
they were supposed to be bound
yes,
by this
yes, yes,
declaration.
by this
Yes.
declaration. But I want to point to one thing.
Mm-hmm.
By emphasizing so much on neutrality, that you will
Mm-hmm.
remain neutral in spite of any other conflict coming your way, uh, this is my own perception and my point of view. I
Mm-hmm.
haven't picked this up from anywhere else, and I don't know if I'm absolutely correct. But I feel this emphasis on neutrality and this fear that you might get, ASEAN countries might get drawn into another regional or even global conflict, uh, was, in my view, also underpinning this
Mm-hmm.
principle of philosophy of ASEAN of non-interference in internal affairs.
Ah. Mm.
Because a strong principle of ASEAN was non-interference in the affairs of each other.
Each other, yes.
So,
Okay.
in my view, this prevented, and I'm giving you my own personal view on this. In my
Mm-hmm.
view, this prevented ASEAN as a body drawing accountability from one of their countries, one of the ASEAN countries, that may be perpetrating gross violation of human rights within their
Mm.
country.
I see, I see. So in a way, this could be an advantage, but also a disadvantage
Yes,
for the countries who
yes,
join the ASEAN region.
that is
Well,
what I am saying. That's what I am saying.
yes. So there's a good thing and a bad thing, an advantage and a disadvantage to that. And
Yes.
considering, I guess, you as a human rights advocate, was there any difference then with the creation of the ASEAN before, and how would you compare it nowadays? Because you mentioned a while ago that since other countries cannot interfere with other states who are members of the ASEAN when there is a gross violence or violations of human rights, then how do you think this could be this has changed throughout,
No.
or
You see, this has not changed.
I see.
Because what has changed, as I want to say, is more institutionalizing of human rights has happened, which
Mm-hmm.
is the ASEAN Charter was developed somewhere in the 2008. There was Human Rights Declaration that came out much later,
Mm-hmm.
and also the formation of the ASEAN Intergovernmental Human Rights Commission. These are institutions of human rights that came into being.
Mm-hmm.
This is new.
But
We didn't have this before.
mm-hmm.
But this principle of non-interference has never changed.
Mm.
Because the anomaly in these institutions is, on the one hand, all of these institutions, whether it's a charter, whether it is a human rights declaration, or the ASEAN Intergovernmental Human Rights Commission, speak about norms of human rights,
Mm-hmm.
universality, and principles of human rights that all people must enjoy and be able to exercise. At the same time, parallel to it, side by side, they reiterate the principle of non-interference. All decisions within ASEAN, when they come together as a body through the Human Rights Intergovernmental Human Rights Commission, decisions, or ASEAN as a body decisions will be made through consensus.
Consensus of the states, of those who are members
All
of the
10, now
ASEAN.
currently there are 10. All 10 countries must agree on a
Mm-hmm.
decision. So non-interference, which meant consensus decision. And that has not changed from the day of
Wow.
inception until today.
So in a way,
So,
this has been a disadvantage because
yes,
what you're trying
yes,
to say is that there is no accountability on the part
no,
of ASEAN members when it comes to human rights violations. I mean, we recognize that there are institutions, but if they're, for example, in Myanmar, the issue
exactly, of the
on human
Rohingya.
rights violations, yes, recently, the ASEAN members cannot interfere or cannot hold Myanmar accountable for these
Yes,
violations.
yes. So ASEAN as a body, as an entity, becomes ineffective.
Okay. I like that you are giving us a perspective of the good things and the bad things that are
Yeah.
that have been happening, because it's one thing to have these things institutionalized, but at the same time it's also another to have these declarations or treaties to be implemented. I mean, implementation is different from merely just signing or agreeing to certain principles. And what you have mentioned a while ago, especially on non-interference, creates a very big impact in terms of how the ASEAN region reacts to certain issues and to certain issues here in the region.
You see, there are other regional bodies, like you have the European Union or European
Mm-hmm.
Commission, you have African Charter and the African Commission, you have you have the American Commission on Human Rights. All of them function differently.
Mm-hmm.
They clearly say, like Europe says, you see, the other important thing is Europe has, and also American Commission and the African Commission, they have a common charter.
Mm-hmm.
We too have, ASEAN too has a charter, but the charter is not binding on all, in the sense that it sets out principles, but it's not mandatory to implement them. The European and all these other three countries have courts.
Yes, they do have courts.
They have
Yes,
a court. So, and
courts that hold the states who are members accountable
yes,
for certain things. Unlike
so
ASEAN, yes.
ASEAN doesn't have a court. It refuses. It will not have a court. So, because it is through a court hearing that if there is a gross violation, and individuals can bring a complaint
Yes.
to the court even. ASEAN refuses to move in that direction and hold anybody accountable.
Well, I guess on
So,
that note, you're already letting us know that these are very significant barriers that are being created in upon the creation of ASEAN. But then I just want to ask then, I mean, if these barriers, if these problems have already emerged throughout the years, what do you think these barriers are slowly being overcome, or are these being addressed?
I don't see any, really, I don't see any change. And the reason, you see, one of your questions was also, what is the one barrier to ASEAN? You have a question, and there I'm addressing that there as well. One of the reasons why there is no progress in this area of ASEAN taking on a function of drawing accountability is that the principle of non-interference and the consensus building, but also because ASEAN countries are so diverse. Especially the later countries who joined 30 years later, which is Cambodia, Vietnam, Laos, Myanmar. Their commitment to democracy and human rights is very, very limited. They're very, very autocratic. At least founding countries of Thailand, Philippines, Indonesia, Malaysia, Singapore, um, have better democratic principles that they abide by.
Mm.
Multi-party system, general elections, uh, but these other countries remain autocratic. Uh,
Mm.
and
So there still is that great barrier
yes,
among the countries.
yes,
There's one side or one group that is very democratic in a sense, but there are also others who remain autocratic or have very limited participation when it comes to being democratic
yeah.
in that sense.
Yeah.
Yes.
So you see, democratic principles are so limited in these other countries like Cambodia, Laos, Vietnam, and Myanmar, that when a consensus decision is made, if there is any decision on human rights, the decision is based on the lowest denominator, which is
Mm.
which is the human rights standards
Mm-hmm.
uh, that is approved by these Laos, Vietnam, Cambodia,
Mm-mm.
Myanmar.
So in a way, there is some sort of restriction,
Yes,
or it just has to meet the bare minimum instead of
yes,
pushing it further to
yes, yes,
to
yes,
to promote human rights and to
yeah.
become more democratic in that sense. But then, on that note, Shanti, may I just ask then if these barriers, or I know that this is very significant, but is there a way then that we can overcome these kinds of barriers? What do you think, or in your opinion, what are the things that the ASEAN could do or maybe push forward so that these barriers could be overcome?
Well, the only possibility is the potential of civil society organizations
Mm-hmm.
uh, that can demand, first of all, not ASEAN as an entity, but their own countries to change.
But there is hope. There is hope, and I mean, for example, civil society organizations like yours push for certain advocacies that I think are very effective nowadays. And although um, it may be far from its goals, it's still a step forward, right?
Yeah. You see, one of the things that ASEAN has done, which is a good thing, is
Mm-hmm.
that they have uh, created a process or a procedure by which civil society organizations can become, I don't know what is the word for it. They can become like uh,
Catalysts.
approved, approved by the ASEAN
Mm.
Secretariat.
Mm-hmm.
So you have a status, uh,
Yes.
and you can attend certain meetings and so on. That is one good step forward.
Mm-hmm.
So if we can build on things like that, um, and see what will be the role for civil society organizations who have consultative status. Yes, that was what it is called. Who have consultative status. Uh,
Consultative status. Okay.
consultative status. Uh, then,
Meaning you are invited as consultants or
yeah,
resource
yeah,
persons
yeah,
in
yeah,
terms of.
yeah,
Mhm.
yeah. So we have to keep working on that a lot more,
Mhm.
and also to use international institutions like the Human Rights Council and the United Nations itself to bring about change in human rights in all of our countries.
All right, that's a very good point that you have told us, Shanti. The role of civil society organizations in a consultative status and their participation in different institutions and organizations, just like
Yeah.
what you mentioned a while ago.
Uh,
So, thank you very much, Shanti, for the insights that you have given us. Maybe at this point, as we are about to end the episode, do you have any other things that you would like to discuss or tell us as we say, I guess as we wrap up this episode, especially with regard to the role of civil society organizations?
yeah, I was saying that civil society must not give up on the ASEAN or
Mm-hmm.
get so frustrated that they want to give up. The civil society must continue to work with ASEAN and try to influence their philosophy, really.
Yes.
And we work first, we have to work first, however, at our own country level, with
Mm-hmm.
our own government, and with the representatives on the institutions like AISHA, the ASEAN Intergovernmental Human Rights Commission. All of us have a representative. And so we work with them first and work on them first, and then collectively we should continue to educate ASEAN on the importance
Yes.
of democracy, on human rights, and how at the end of the day this will benefit their people.
Mm-hmm.
The problem is the ASEAN, some of the ASEAN governments more than the others,
Mm-hmm.
um, are protecting their own position within the government of their countries. And
Mm-hmm.
we have to make them see that they have to take more of an interest in the welfare of the people.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Uh, and that political stability is important if this is to happen. But it's a long-term agenda, but we must not give
Mm-hmm.
up.
Yes. And I think on that note, I would like to commend you and the work that you have done and the NGOs that you have formed throughout the years. I know we all know that it's still a long way to go, but there is hope. And I think we can end on that, that there is hope and that we should not give up, especially on the part of civil society organizations in trying to push human rights in the ASEAN region and accountability on the part of members of the ASEAN, especially on the level of pushing for more democracy, education, and I guess empowerment also to the different members of the ASEAN region or to the different states who are members of the ASEAN. Well, thank you so much, Shanti, for all your insights today. We learned a lot from you, and we hope to see you again in our other episodes. That's all for today's episode in ASEAN Peoples Speak. Thank you again, Shanti, for your insights today, and thank you all for listening, and thank you for joining me today. Shanti, would you want to promote your social media accounts or your website or organization publications or any upcoming projects?
No, no, no. I don't think. The only thing I would say right now is that
Mhm.
Malaysia is in the midst of, in Parliament, we have gender sexual harassment law, a
Mhm.
standalone sexual harassment law, and is being debated
In the
Parliament,
Congress, in Parliament,
yeah,
yeah.
for us in
Mhm.
Parliament, even as we speak.
Mm.
Uh, so this is something we are looking
Are you
forward to.
also involved in this? Are you in a
Yes,
consultative status? Oh,
no, no.
that's nice.
The women's groups have come together and worked with the Ministry of Women to promote this law, and it is now going into Parliament for its third reading, and we're hoping it
Mm.
will get passed.
Well, hopefully it will get passed.
Okay, yes, that's all I want
Yes.
to say.
Oh, okay. All right, but we are hoping for the best. And as you continue your advocacy work together with all other NGOs, especially there in Malaysia, we hope that all things will go well and that
Okay,
the
I hope so.
government
Thank you.
and the
Thank you.
parliament will listen um, to you and to whatever you stand for. So we hope for the
Thank you.
best, and
Okay, thank you.
we wish that the law will be passed soon.
Thank
All
you very
right.
much. Thank you.
So
Okay.
join us again next week as we have another episode for ASEAN Peoples Speak Season 2. Make sure that you subscribe to the podcast on Spotify so you never miss an episode. Also, subscribe to our Facebook page, Instagram, and YouTube channel at WG ASEAN HR MEC, and visit our website at ASEANHRMEC.org. Ladies and gentlemen, this has been your host, Regine Jessica Well, for ASEAN People Speak Season 2. See you all next week, and good night. Bye!